Hello everyone, my name is Ankita Agarwal and welcome back to my channel. So students, in our previous lecture, we discussed the key points of differences between the file system and DBMS and how DBMS is better than the traditional file system to manage the data. So now today we will discuss the DBMS architecture. Students, this is an important topic of DBMS from examination point of view as well as it will help you to gain a better understanding of the data. But before we start with the topic, I just want to request you all to subscribe to my channel if you have not subscribed and hit the bell icon so that you will get the latest notifications about my videos. So now let's start with the topic. And the topic is DBMS architecture. Before going to know about the architecture of the DBMS, firstly we have to know the three levels that are present in the database management system. That is the external level, also known as the view level. Second is the conceptual level, also called as the logical level, and the internal level or the storage level. Now let us discuss them one by one. First is the external level. So this level basically describes that part of the database which is relevant to each user. That is, it basically means it holds the only that particular information which can be useful for the user. And this level is also known as the view level because the user can see and will be able to interact with this level. That is why it is also called as the view level. Second is the conceptual level. Conceptual level basically describes what data is stored in the database and the relationship among that data. That is, it describes what data, or we can say what type of data is stored in the database and the relationship between that data. So conceptual or logical level basically represents all entities, their attributes and their relationships. And it also describes the constraints on the data. Along with it, it also describes the security and integrity information related to the data. Now let's see the third level, that is the internal level. It is a physical representation of the database. That is, this level describes that how the data is stored in the database. So in conceptual level, we were talking about what data is stored. But here in internal level, it describes that how that data is stored in the database. So, this is about the three levels that were present in the database system architecture. Now students, there are two types of DBMS architecture, or you can say the database architecture in DBMS is logically divided into two types. That is the two-tier client-server architecture and the three-tier client-server architecture. Now let's firstly discuss the two-tier client-server architecture. Two-tier client-server architecture is used for the application program that runs on the client side. Now let's understand this with the help of a diagram. So here we have these three computers. So these are the client computers. And on the other hand, you can see there is a server computer. Now what happens is the whole data is here in the server computer. And to manage this data, a software is used here which is DBMS. So just like these client machines, these three client machines, more number of client machines can also be there on the client side. For example, in banks, you must have seen there are number of employees who all are accessing their computers, and these all computers are connected to one server, right, from where they are accessing their data. Because in client computer they have just one program, or I can say all these client computers are having same or similar kind of a program. Now what happens is all of the data is on the server, right, and client computers are just having one program, right. Also the server computer is having the DBMS along with the data. Now one driver or software is required to create communication between these client computers and the server. Usually different companies make their own DBMS, and also they make the drivers which will help in accessing this data. So we have to install this driver on the client machines, and then the application program which is installed on the client machines uses these drivers to send messages and requests to the server side, and then after that the program which is installed on the server side then accesses the database present there and then sends the required or desired data back to the client. So this is how the client's two-tier client server architecture works, right? So this is why this architecture is called as the two-tier client server architecture, where server is also a computer. Like we have different client computers, server is also a computer on the other hand, but server is the only computer where all the data or information is stored, because here we can see there is only one machine on the server side. So it's easy to secure the data on one computer, that is the server computer, rather than maintaining the security on n number of client computers. So now you can easily understand that in two-tier architecture, there is a direct interaction between the client and the server. But students, nowadays there is one major problem, that is nowadays number of users are not limited. That is, where there is a situation like we have huge number of users, in that case two-tier architecture is not at all a good idea, because in two-tier architecture client sends the request in the form of a query and server processes the query as well as responds to it. But when there are infinite number of users, it's not possible for the server to receive and processes such huge amount of queries. For this, three-tier architecture is introduced, where there is one intermediate layer is involved between the client and the server. This intermediate layer is called as the application layer. Now let's understand this with the help of a diagram. Here you can see that this is a client computer, and on the other hand this is a server computer, and here there is one application layer is in between the client and the server computer. Now what happens here is, let's understand with the help of a very simple example. When we open any banking app, there is one interface which is responsible for making an interaction between the client and the server. So what we do, we simply fill the required details like user ID, password, and then that interface will send the queries and requests to the application layer which is in between the client and the server. Then this application layer is responsible for processing the queries and requests of the user. Whereas in two-tier architecture, the process of the queries were also being done by the server, thereby creating an extra load on the server. Because in two-tier architecture, there is a direct interaction between the client and the server, and no application layer is involved in between the client and the server. So here the server work is just to send the desired data and not to process the queries along with it. So this is how the three-tier client server architecture works. Now the advantages of the two-tier architecture. These are some of the advantages of the two-tier architecture. First is the maintenance. So students, maintenance is easy in two-tier architecture because the number of the users are limited and the number of the layers are also two. So therefore it doesn't require much maintenance. Second is easy to implement. Because the number of the layers involved here in two-tier architecture is less as compared to the three-tier architecture. So it is easy to implement two-tier architecture rather than the three-tier architecture. And the third advantage is faster communication. So here the communication that takes place in between the client and the server is obviously faster because there is no such intermediate layer present in between the client and the server. Now let's discuss the advantages of the three-tier architecture. First is the scalability. Scalability is basically the capacity to be changed in size or scale. And now you can easily say this, that three-tier architecture is easily scalable because here the application layer is involved, which can help to deal with n number of requests and n number of users. That is, the multiple number of users can now access the data with the help of three-tier architecture. Second advantage is security. Security is obviously maintained higher in three-tier architecture because user cannot directly access the data and is not directly communicating with the server where whole data is present. Right? So if you open any banking app, for example, an interface comes on your screens. So you will be then asked with the user ID, password, and then your request goes to the application layer first, where it is then processed, and after that the server will send you the desired information. That is, you are not communicating, or I can say you are not allowed here to see or access the data directly from the server. So here security is surely maintained as compared to the two-tier architecture. Next advantage of the three-tier architecture is the increased performance. So in three-tier architecture, performance is surely increased because in three-tier architecture, it can easily deal with the n number of requests of the n number of users. Right? Because the application layer or the intermediate layer in between the client and the server will take all the queries and requests from the user and then process it and then send it back to the server, and the server then send back the desired data to the client. So this will not create too much load on the server, thereby increasing its performance. Right? So students, this is all about the two-tier and the three-tier architecture. Further, we will discuss in the next video. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching videos on my channel, Professor Ankita Agarwal. And please don't forget to subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching.